We get to continue with our Dear Church sermon series, where we're getting to hear people's love letters and laments to the church. And today we get to hear from Patti and then Michael. And so we're really excited for that. I'm just going to turn it over to them for us to hear their stories.
Yay, Patti. Hi, I'm Patti Lindman. And Dear Church, yes, you know I'm a lifelong Lutheran, being baptized as a baby almost 70 years ago now. I'm proud of my Lutheran heritage, well, most of it. Martin Luther would be proud of how we've passed on the theology of grace through faith for over 500 years. As you know, we Lutherans continue the tradition of serving the marginalized people that Jesus lifted up in Matthew 25. But church, I need to speak with you about your stubborn clinging to traditional forms of worship. I grew up with the red hymnal in the 50s and 60s, and while I'm fond of many of your old hymns, you didn't allow much space for new songs of new generations. Sadly, I believe that ignoring the heart songs of younger generations is partly to blame for the lack of young people in your Lutheran pews today. My heart songs were those of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and the Beatles, and Joni Mitchell. I learned to play guitar in the 8th grade in 1969 when protest songs were popular. Young people were protesting the Vietnam War. President John Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated. The rock musical, Jesus Christ Superstar, was blowing people away, presenting quite a different image of Jesus than the meek character we'd learned about in Sunday school. The music was incredible. Who wanted to go back to singing the old hymns we sang on Sunday? You can give our pastor credit for using the Chicago folk service, a precursor to contemporary music that included a liturgy. He got our high school youth involved by inviting 3 of us to play guitar for it. We used the folk service occasionally on Sunday mornings during the regular worship times, but it didn't last. And this was over 50 years ago. And it's still difficult to find Lutheran churches with good contemporary music for weekly worship. Dear Church, I have to confess that my husband and I have resorted to worshiping with the Methodists on Sunday mornings. And that's saying something when your husband is a retired Lutheran pastor. Change comes slowly. Like that joke, how many Lutherans does it take to change a light bulb? Change a light bulb? And church, do you remember that my confirmation class was the first class where you allowed girls to be acolytes? Up to this point, only boys could be acolytes. This happened in 1970, the same year you allowed Lutheran women to be ordained. Finally, hallelujah. When I became a student at Augustana College in Rock Island, in Illinois, a Lutheran school no less, I stopped going to Sunday worship. I was usually up late on Saturday nights, meeting interesting people and having new experiences, and I wanted to sleep in on Sunday mornings. Thankfully, the campus church offered an alternative gathering, a Wednesday evening prayer and communion service. No organ, no liturgy. There would be quiet music playing in a mostly dark sanctuary. Everyone would sit quietly and pray and then take communion. It was a very popular service that offered a simple yet powerful time of reflection and reconnection with God. It was a refreshing change. That alternative evening service kept me grounded as I struggled with my future and where I was headed. Church, even though you don't like change, in 1978, you came out with a new green hymnal, the Lutheran Book of Worship. It had some great new hymns and modern language, but ignored the gifted Lutheran musicians of that day, like Marty Haugen, Jay Beach, and John Yildisacker. Their more contemporary songs were either not included in the new hymnal or added as an afterthought in supplemental publishings. Jeff and I were married in 1979. His first call was to a church in Fort Byron, Illinois, right on the mighty Mississippi River. We regularly used a folk service that used tunes from the protest songs of the 60s. By that time, those tunes were over 20 years old, but that was better than only using hymns that were centuries old. Reaching younger people through music has always been a priority for us. We started a family and then got involved in helping host Via de Cristo retreats in our area in Illinois. Via de Cristo means way of Christ. These retreats are designed to renew the spiritual life of Christians. I was truly renewed and re-energized after my retreat. I had always known that God loves me, but this experience helped me to better understand the depth of God's love for me personally. As a result of my retreat weekend, my faith moved from my head to my heart. The newer music was a key part of that. I got serious about having a real relationship with God, and out of gratitude for his love, I became more committed to a life of daily prayer, study, and action. Jeff and I served on many retreat weekends after that. I had the opportunity to play guitar several times, share my faith story, sing beautiful worship songs that weren't in the hymnal. This developed my leadership gifts and a strong foundation of prayer that I would need in the future. It also gave me lots of joy. At our second church, instead of using an organ every week, we recruited a band with keyboard, drums, guitars, and singers. We played modern songs we heard on the radio. These songs were every bit as powerful as the old hymns sung at other services in other churches. Church, that was in the early 90s. Can you explain to me why more Lutherans aren't using modern songs in worship today? As I look back, I see how God used this time to prepare me for our move from Illinois to Orlando, Florida. Jeff was working as a mission developer, like Pastor Michael, and was given permission to restart a 10-year-old congregation with a new name and a new location and an elementary school cafeteria. Church, it was quite an exciting roller coaster ride. Jeff was ahead of his time, using projection and contemporary music instead of hymnals for the entire service. This was 30 years ago. At first, the music was provided just by me and a high school freshman playing on the keyboard. Different music directors helped our worship team grow, singing relatively contemporary music. In just 3 years, we were bursting with young families who had moved into the growing housing development in East Orlando. After 2 false starts, that was the roller coaster ride, and 8 years of setting up and tearing down everything, we were able to purchase a former bowling alley for our permanent mission outpost. In time, we were fortunate to find a super talented music director who brought his father's Pentecostal spirit and his family's Latin energy to our music. I was blessed to continue to be a part of a very dynamic worship team. Meanwhile, when our 2 kids were in 2nd and 4th grade, I had gone back to teaching at the elementary level. It was not my plan, but I was asked to work with students on the autism spectrum. They were the most challenging and yet fascinating group of children. I relied heavily on verse in Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I prayed daily that God would give me wisdom and the ability to see the children through his eyes. God gave me many manna moments of encouragement while using music with my students. Since they responded well to music, I used it as a teaching tool. Music engages both hemispheres of the brain. It helps with language development, among other benefits. The music mattered to my students. Music matters in the church too. Dear church, another 10 years has passed. The battle for fresh expressions of church that appeal to younger generations continues. I have to say that the music we sing here at the Collective isn't always my style, but that's okay, because look at all you beautiful younger people. I know it's not just the music, but more importantly, the message that the music and the pastor shares, and that is Jesus' love for all people. Pastor Michael does a wonderful job with communicating that love and acceptance. Hillary and the band reinforce that message with their modern music. And because of the witness of the Collective and other churches like it, I have hope for the future of the church at large.
Dear church, as a child I was deeply drawn to the idea that there was more out there than what I knew. I was always searching for something bigger than the life I was living, an alternative reality where meaning, beauty, and purpose existed beyond what I could immediately see. I read constantly, I studied psychology, I played role-playing games, I was fascinated by human dynamics, by the possibility that there was something larger than me holding the world together. I didn't have the language for it then, but I was already searching for God. I grew up Roman Catholic, and what I loved most was the wonder, the sense that mystery was allowed, that not everything had to be fully explained to be meaningful. I loved the smell of the candles, the comfort of singing similar hymns week after week, the beauty of our echoes filling the cathedral, voices layered together bigger than any one person alone. Church gave shape to my longing. It gave me beauty, it gave me hope, and it gave me a sense of home. It told me that my suffering as a child wasn't meaningless, that there was something sacred in it, that even if life wasn't fair, God loved me, and I could be more than my experiences. But the first time something didn't sit right in my relationship with the church, I was in second grade, studying for my first communion. I asked big questions, specifically, how could God have always existed? My teacher didn't have answers, and I remember feeling unsettled because I needed faith to hold together. I needed God to make sense, not in full black and white explanation, but with some level of honesty. If God was real, if truth was real, then it had to hold together, both in love and in ethics. I didn't know it then, but I was already forming a theology, one that required honesty. As I got older, that need for coherence followed me, and eventually it collided with what I was taught about sexuality. I was taught that God only approved of heterosexuality, and as a gay boy, I realized there was no space for me in the God that I was being handed. This wasn't just painful, it was illogical. I didn't choose not to be heterosexual, so how could God not love me? How could God not accept me? And how could the people around me, people who claim to follow a loving God, do the same? In order to stay, I had to minimize myself. Faithfulness meant denying who I was, and I tried because I believed faith was supposed to be costly. Paul spoke of a thorn in his side, and I wondered if maybe this was mine. But living that way didn't produce holiness. It produced anxiety, depression, and hopelessness. And deep down, I knew this: a God who requires dishonesty in order to belong cannot be the source of truth. Then the theology fractured again. Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice. I watched people I loved in church justify violence and dismiss the suffering of black children. And this time I couldn't rationalize it away. I could fight myself in silence, but I could not reconcile a theology that excused racism and called it righteousness. What broke wasn't just my trust, it was the system. I realized the faith I was being asked to uphold was intertwined with something much darker. Racism, white supremacy, patriarchy, homophobia, and power masquerading as God. Compassion was, in fact, optional. Logic was selective, and love depended on who you were or who you performed as. Like Django, one block removed caused the entire structure to collapse. It was one thing to suffer quietly by myself. It was another to participate in a faith that allowed others to suffer quietly and out loud too. So I stepped away. I distanced myself from church and from the conservative power structures wrapped around it. For a while, I lived without faith, just living and learning how to live. But this time was hard. And when I say hard, I mean a constant tightness in my chest. Everything I had known, my life, my marriage, my degrees in theology, the career I had curated within Christian spaces, my friendships, every single thing came crashing down. They say one major life event at a time is stressful enough. A death, a divorce, a move. Imagine every fragment of life coming apart at once. Plus, imagine the entire foundation of faith, something so central to so many of our lives, no longer feeling secure. I felt like an outsider whose only destination was hell, and whose only purpose was to serve as a warning, an example of what not to do, who not to be. I wasn't the one Jesus would leave to find. I was only created to be an example of who not to be. Eventually, I did return to the Gospels, but I did not return alone. I returned because of queer people, because of non-binary people, because of trans people. because of siblings who came before me, who wrestled with their faith, survived the harm, and still found their way back to a God who loved them as they were. The same way trans and lesbian siblings carried gay men through the AIDS crisis, and before that, the fight for queer liberation, they carried me personally from destruction back to hope and wonder and awe. And I met Jesus again, this time without the intermediaries. And I realized something. His words did hold together. They aligned with the theology I had been forming all along. Compassion, love, the least being the greatest. Pride, greed, nationalism, and domination were named as evils. I found myself drawn not to the power systems around me, but to humility. I saw myself in the unnamed people who followed Jesus, the ones without perfect theology, the ones who didn't have it all figured out, the ones who simply trusted him enough to walk one step at a time. I released the legalism I had been handed as truth, and I released the rule following as righteousness. And instead I found relationship, and not the kind they espouse now as a buzzword. Real, authentic, messy, loving relationship. I began turning the gem of scripture, learning to study how our Jewish siblings do, seeing God from new angles. And slowly I felt at home again. Not in an institution, but in a God who loved me exactly as I was and as I am, as he created me. Now I see God everywhere, not just as God of America, but the creator of the entire world in every single person. I see him in people and places as I travel the world, in beauty across cultures and how people connect with the divine, in the love that binds us all together. Church is no longer a building to me. Church is time and space shared by humble, real, authentic humans. People willing to say we don't know it all, but we know there is something bigger than us, and we owe love to one another. It's in isolation when I cry out or journal, laying my heart before God poetically like David. It's over drinks at a bar as we truly fellowship about life. It's in text messages when friends are too tired to speak on the phone. It's at Pride celebrating the fullness of our humanity. It is in the ballot box praying for a nation and world that systematically feeds and educates instead of bombs, kidnaps, and steals land and resources. This is church. This is my home. Wherever I step, in my mistakes, in my learning, in my unlearning, in the fullness of my humanity. God is my home, present with me in every single moment of it all. And in finding this God, this love, this body, I hope to raise my children differently. I hope they will enter directly into this beauty of existence without the level of harm I and so many of us have endured. And when they face hardship, because they will, I believe their faith will meet them in every room, every space, every place, and in every pair of eyes they meet. I believe we will find our way home, to ourselves, to one another, and to God as our Abba, no matter how hard the journey gets. Dear church, there is still so much more to learn, but I believe we can be rooted enough to stay home with ourselves, with God, with one another. This is my hope for you, that you find church and belonging and fellowship in and out of these walls, with honesty, with hope, and with love.